Welcome viewers, this is Literary Goa and today a new day with a new guest. With me is this significantly huge book called Fonseca. The author of the book is my old friend Delio Mendonça, priest, historian, professor of church history in the Gregorian University in Rome. Over to you, Father Dr. Delio. Tell us about this magnum opus of yours.
Thank you, Dr. Frederick. I'm happy to be here to speak about Fonseca, because I think that he has ideas worth spreading. And of course, I would also like to spread my own ideas on Fonseca, on art, and on history of Goa. Fonseca, as you know, and many of our viewers also know, is a great master artist. Is a pioneer, very original artist of Indian Christian art. But the sad part of it is that very few people know about him. And as I said at the beginning, this is an artist whose ideas are worth spreading. And with this book, I hope to raise some issues and to spread what art meant, the idea of what art meant for Fonseca, and what art does. Who are the artists?
So in a word, Father, Angelo Fonseca was this artist from Goa,
Yes.
who left Goa early, maybe in the 1930s or 40s, and traveled to a large number of cities, bridged these different art forms, and particularly the Indianization of Christian art in that sense.
Yes.
How would you explain his significance to someone who has not yet encountered his work? Here, for example, on the cover of the book is the Virgin in a very Indic style.
Yes.
And across the book, it has tons of paintings and images which are really unusual and different from the images we have coming from Western Christianity.
Yes.
What made you take an interest in his work, first of all?
Oh, the image that is seen here on the cover is of the Madonna, Our Lady, young Our Lady. But it's true that it is Indian, but it is very much Goan.
I see.
And because he was an artist from Goa, he always carried, wherever he went, as you said, to different parts. He studied in Bombay, first in Belgaum, Pune, Bombay, Shantiniketan, and then he came back to Goa and Pune. Wherever he went, he carried that, image, the idea of Goa. And this is very much present in his paintings, in his art, in his philosophy, and in his life, finally. And what is really the relevance is that finally, when one begins to write about an artist, as I did, I began to ask questions. What is art? For me, the definition that I give of art, of course, art is not something only color, line, something innocent to decorate walls. No, the art, a particular type of art, as it was the art of Fonseca, is a discourse. It's like a parable. A parable is never that we find in the gospel narrative. It challenges, it provokes, it evokes action. And so art of Fonseca is something like that. That's why the people in Goa, he had to leave Goa in the 30s, early 30s, just because people knew what he was doing and refused to...
And didn't like it.
Yeah, didn't like it. So they knew what he was doing. It's not that the people did not understand what he was doing. Sometimes we think that, they did not understand and so they rejected him. No, for someone to reject somebody else, one has to understand that or has to feel that what he is doing is not right. So that is, despite of not being accepted in Goa as a contributor to Christianity and Christian art, and in general in India, he always came back to Goa. He never had that, sort of anger as you see in Francis Newton Souza, a person from your own village. When he left, he has, harsh criticism against Goans who did not understand the artists, Goan artists, the art, and pushed them out. So what Fonseca tries to do with this type of, with this art, this is a counter narrative to colonial art.
In those days when colonialism was still an idea probably at its height.
Yes. But today it serves the same purpose because although we have a political independence, colonial ideas still continues very much entrenched in our psyche, in our behavior. Perhaps sometimes even more than during the colonial times. This idea of, the discrimination of the,
natural order of things.
Yeah, that we always think that the other side is better than our own. And the sad part is that we still have not discovered Fonseca.
When did you first discover him, and what were your initial thoughts?
Yes, I was, for many years at the Xavier Center of Historical Research.
Yeah.
And the Xavier Center of Historical Research had some paintings. And then in 2006, the Xavier Center received a huge collection with a condition that it would display and create a sort of a school on Indian Christian art. It is from that moment that...
You were director then of the XCHR.
I was a director. And there was somebody also very interested, and together we walked the path of discovering Fonseca, and that is Vivek Minish. Okay. He knows a lot about art, and he wrote the foreword for this book. I wanted him to write because we had walked the path together, and so we discussed a lot about it, and that's how we grew. We began to discover, we began to take a great interest in the ideas and images of Fonseca. There's lots to discover.
Could you show us some of your favorites, maybe?
This one is really my one of the favorites. This is the oil. But there are many.
He worked in different media.
Most of it was in watercolors because he follows the tradition of Shantiniketan School of Art. And besides that, as he himself said, oil paints were very expensive and he could not afford, because he did sell some books, some paintings, but he did not sell as many because we can see so many remained. And some of the great benefactors of Fonseca were the Jesuits, who put him in touch with others and who bought some of his paintings. And that's why I feel this was one of the reasons, because the Jesuits have been very kind, generous patrons of Fonseca.
Father Harris in particular?
Father Harris and a few others. Father Ledley more recently, but Father Harris was one of the first Jesuits. But there are several other Jesuits. And this, I think, was right for the legacy of this treasure to be entrusted to the Jesuits, because the Jesuits have been leading society in the field of arts and architecture. And I think his painting should be, we should know the meanings, present in his art, which requires constant interpretation.
There are some challenges also of maintaining them in climates like Goa.
Yes,
spaces like Goa.
Yes, because the paper, since it was painted in watercolors on some paper, and at that time there weren't special type of papers, it has to be maintained with care and yes, with great care. And I think Jesuits are doing all the possible efforts to maintain them well. And
Father Harris was, of course, this Spaniard historian who
Yes.
has a huge legacy, and including a stamp, I think, on him in India.
yes,
And
yes,
he was involved in Goa, studying some historical artifacts here and things like that.
yes. But another thing that I would like to also
Mention.
add, Frederick, is that so far the interpretation of or the narrative of Fonseca has been dominated by the clergy. And naturally, the clergy thought of Fonseca or thinks of Fonseca, still continues to think in terms of enculturation.
Okay.
And enculturation is a reality very much within the church. As I mentioned in the book, I think we cannot limit artists, great artists, master artists that way. They go beyond, limits that we normal people want to impose on them. His discourse goes beyond. He wants to bridge communities that follow different beliefs and religions, different ethnic communities, different cultures. So Fonseca, as an eclectic, not syncretic, eclectic painter, artist, he wants to bring communities together. And that's what great artists do. Fonseca, for me, the art of Fonseca, for that matter, not only Fonseca, is an occasion for conversation, as we are doing now, for reconciliation of cultures. Because good art is inclusive, and that's what the art of Fonseca is all about. He brings into his art different traditions, Islamic, Hindu, Buddhist, and Christian, as well, Christian elements. So he's very rich.
And he also bridged the Bombay school with the Calcutta school and was studying under Rabindranath Tagore, the brother of Rabindranath.
Yes. These two schools, according to José Pereira, the great polymath José Pereira, Fonseca is a person who linked the Bombay school and Shantiniketan school. He has an article which has not been published, but in the foreword that Vivek Menezes wrote, Vivek quotes a long passage from this article, essay of José Pereira that has not been yet published fully. And it's interesting the way José Pereira looks at Fonseca being a bridge, as he was a bridge between cultures, traditions. He also bridges these two schools, which had very different, approaches.
I want to understand your role as a bridge. So you were this young lad who came back from Mozambique in the 70s and
Yes.
fits into Goan society and encounters someone like Angelo de Fonseca. Later. Was it culture shock initially?
It takes time to understand Fonseca. And, it's like reading art takes time. It's like when one starts, reading a textbook, one does not understand everything immediately. Likewise, art. But this point that you brought, that me coming from Mozambique, Portuguese-speaking country, then you come to an English-speaking country with a totally different culture, I realized something. In fact, someone pointed it to me that I was not even aware, because we tend to take for granted that which we are. And that's what Fonseca tells us. You have to discover that which you are and that you can become. Among all my companions, I like to boast about this, but someone else pointed it to me, not that I was boasting, but that I am like this. Among all the professors that are Jesuit companions from about 30 nationalities and among 70 Jesuits, I am the only one who, so to say, has an experience, who I've been in 3 continents. I say that my experience is continental: Africa, Asia, and Europe. Now I've been for about 12 years. All of them, they have experience of two cultures. They are either from US or from South America and from India, in Europe. Only two, but I think I have been privileged to have this inclusive experience of cultures, and I think makes me more tolerant, and so therefore it is not any cultural shock anymore, and it has never been so strong a shock. Even when I came to, I had to struggle in 1977 to adjust
with the language. And
yes, and I wanted to learn English. And people used to talk with me in Portuguese as if they wanted to improve their Portuguese. And I had to struggle. I had to tell them, please speak in English.
Tell us, how has it been as a professor of church history in the Gregorian University? Because we know Father Delio as the director of XCHR.
The way, Frederick, the way priests think about history, I think most of them, it's just general sort of a statement. It's very different, at least those I teach, very different from what a layperson thinks. I teach priests who have done theology, of course philosophy, then theology. And in the first years, and this, as you know, minimum theology course is 3 years. Others do it for 5 years, the masters. But I tell many students, you have to think like historians. If you want to think like theologians, they do theology. And if you want to think in history like theologians, you go and do theology. You don't, because theology, history has a method, object. You have to be.
It's a different logic system altogether.
Yes, it's a different methodology. It's a different way of thinking. This doesn't mean that, I tell them, this doesn't mean that, we are not talking about God. God and faith is always at the back is part of, but you cannot justify some event by saying, no, this is a mystery or this is, providence. No, you have to explain. If you want to have a dialogue, a conversation with others outside, you cannot. You have to be very, historical in your. As a historian, so these are my challenges with them. But there is always a tendency to fall back into, because if you think. Like a historian has to think, that is, anyway, they feel uncomfortable. But yes, history should make people feel also uncomfortable, especially.
Talking about which, your two other books, very different. One is your PhD thesis on convergence and citizenship. And the other is your tiny book, which I have a copy of in my collection, the Portuguese Fable for Children. Of course, that's just an aside. First, your PhD thesis. What is the argument there?
That is conversions and citizenry go under Portugal. I cover the first 100 years. You see, traditional, I talk about, of course, history and historiography. There is a big difference between these two terms. I speak about historiography. What is the traditional idea in historiography of conversions? It's always around the idea whether it was forced, whether it was, free. And then, of course, the institutions of conversions like the Inquisition and the Church. But I think we should ask many other questions, particularly today. We should ask, have a post-colonial questions. For instance, we should think what were the continuities, what were the discontinuities in the lives of those converts, even in the lives of those who refused to convert, did not convert. What conversions, did to those who converted? What was the impact on art, on relationships between, the converts, Christians, and the other majority community? There is no doubt that Goa, even before the arrival of the Westerners, the Portuguese, was already a place where there was a confluence of cultures, traditions, and religions. In Goa, there were Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists. These were the main the religion. Then comes Christianity in 1510. We should ask, what has been the contribution, although the Christianity that came was a Western colonial Christianity, what was the contribution of this, though colonial Christianity, to Goa, to the Goa setting, and at the same time, what was the contribution, the impact of the existing culture, religions on Christianity? Because the Christianity that came to Goa did not remain the same as that Christianity in Europe. So these are the issues that one has to raise instead of remaining in that narrow type of mentality. Was that forced or not forced? And this type of, and always about the Inquisition. Okay, we know that the Inquisition did create difficulties, but we need to ask many other different questions, post-colonial questions.
Interesting. And of course, I was referring to this tiny book for children, which you narrated the story for, and I think your sister illustrated it.
Yes.
Of course, that's by the way.
This is this Fables. It's a few. Is a part of 97 other fables that has been published in Portuguese, and I've translated it into English. Perhaps one day will be. The power. I'm more and more convinced that the power of stories, which we call it in a more sophisticated, term or jargon, myths. Stories are myths, or myths are stories. The power of myths, of stories, like symbols, the power of art is really tremendous in our lives. We don't even realize the power of the stories, these small stories. Of course, there is always a moral, ethical conclusion which communicates universal values, and we need them today.
Of course, and before winding up, I must mention that this book is brought out by the publisher Architecture Autonomous.
Yes.
And that is Gerard de Cunha,
Yes.
who has been publishing a whole lot of books. I just realized that this was his 14th book.
Yes.
And he does a fine job of publishing his books, because they're all coffee table books, very ambitious and,
Yes.
and
Yes.
costly and things like that. But there is some, if you're watching this early enough, there's a pre-publication discount. Please go for it. Father, last question possibly. Just give us a hint of the chapter breakups and what you're discussing. Yes, I know. That's a dummy, of course, of the book, which is not
Yes.
yet printed, but it will soon be.
Yes, will be soon. See, first of all, I would like to say, yes, I'm very grateful to architect Gerard de Cunha, because, to publish a book like this is very costly, and he really dedicated himself to bring out a good book of world standard. And of course, I also thank the Xavier Center of Historical Research, where I've been, of the Jesuits, and which gave me an opportunity to see the paintings and do research in that beautiful library. So the contents is a forgotten master. He has been forgotten because one of the reasons is that his painting, not many have seen his paintings, but I hope this book, Fonseca, is the beginning, and which will make Fonseca better known. And it's only the beginning of many other books. Second chapter teaches, mentors, influences on Fonseca. Third chapter, Fonseca, a modernist. Who is a modernist? Is Fonseca a modernist or a traditionalist? My conclusion is that he is modernist, because who is a modernist is the one who questions himself and helps, others to question themselves. It's based on, self-inquiry. And he really makes us think. Land, Life, and Times, chapter 4. He land is Goa, his own life, and his own times. We need to know the context in which, Fonseca operated and created his art. Chapter 5, Indian Christian art, the development of Indian Christian art. We had Western Christian art that came 500 years ago, and how slowly it became Indian Christian art, the difficulties, and who were the agents who facilitated this new Christian art. Is a matter only, Indian Christian art is a matter of only 100 years, less than 100 years old. Then the works of Fonseca, chapter 6, the sacred and secular. He has more secular paintings than we think he has. But most of it are sacred themes, religious themes. Then recognition. It is true that he is a forgotten artist, did not have the recognition that he deserves. But during his lifetime, there was a few exhibitions. He had some recognition, but not as he should have been. 8. Objectives, issues, identities. What is the objective? Why did he paint? Why did he produce art? What are the issues raised by this that he raised and his art continues to raise? And identities. After all, this book is about Fonseca, the art of Fonseca, the history of Fonseca, but it is also at the same time as much as about the history of Goa, the Goan identity, Indian Christian art in Asia, in Asia also, in India, also in Goa. But more importantly, there is a question. Goans, since the arrival of course, Catholic Goans particularly, but even the others, since the arrival of the Portuguese opened new views with this, their expansion. We acquired sort of identity which was a global, there is the immigration of Goans, an open sort of identity and culture. But this that we boast about, that of this our great culture, open identity, how come when then at that particular time we with this inclusive identity, personality, refuse to accept Fonseca and many other great artists in Goa? This is a paradox that needs to be resolved. What were the reasons? Political, social, and we are still find difficult to accept perhaps our great artists in Goa.
Father, I'll just interrupt at this stage because we are running short of time. But I won't let you go before asking one question. Do you think the Jesuits today are doing enough for art in India, particularly in Goa?
I need to,
it's a tough one.
But I have to be honest. Needs to do much more. But for the Jesuits to do, or for that, we need to know what is the purpose of art. What is the purpose of art for new evangelization?
There is that book by Christina Oswald on the Jesuit art of Old Goa, which is online also.
Written in stone,
but that's the book version. Okay. But there's an online PhD thesis of hers also, and it focuses on the Jesuits and their role in art in Old Goa in that sense.
Yes, we have to ask, what is the role of art, of artists in the church, in the question of new evangelization, in the spread of the gospel? This is the question. If we don't see any connection, any meaning, no one is going to spend money or do anything. In fact, one does not need to spend lots of money.
Lots of time.
Unless we see a purpose. Angelo Fonseca spent 40 years painting these paintings. He knew what was the purpose of art in the church, not only Goan church or Indian church, but the global church, this type of art. We have to know this. Fonseca can give us an answer. As for me, yes, I think art is the power of art to bring people together, to dialogue and to converse is really immense, and we have to discover. The power of art to reconcile cultures and traditions and religions is immense. It's a language by itself that speaks, beyond our comprehension.
Thanks a ton. And on that note, Delio, thank you so much for spending time here. I know you're on a short visit to Goa in connection with the release of this book. And thanks for all the work you have done. It's great that you keep in touch with Goa and on WhatsApp and through so many other means, email and all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Frederick Noronha, for this interview. Hope to see you again soon.
Thanks.
Thank you.